play their best, and I don't think any malice is ever intended in a match of Pokemon. So we do get to see some very interesting teams from the pair of them, and that's going to be something that really defines this game if Gary can bring his Stranger Things to the World Championships and actually do well with them.
All right, here we go. This match is starting. Gary will be on the left-hand side of your screen, and his team does indeed have that Poliwrath, along with a Mimikyu, a Tapu Koko, a Pelipper, a Smeargle, and a Snorlax against Leonardo's team of the Garchomp, the Tapu Lele, the Celesteela, the Smeargle, the Arcanine, and the Snorlax. Smeargle, not one of those Pokemon we've seen as often going into this season, but making a great appearance here during the round 3 of Swiss at the Pokemon World Championships.
Well, Smeargle's been able to open up a number of options for players this year. Doesn't have access to Dark Void like in previous years, and that's something that a lot of players thought would rule it out entirely. Does still have access to Spore, and it does still get the benefits, of course, from the Moody boosts, which can cause some interesting chaos. Both players bringing one, though, could match up really, really nastily against each other. So I'll be curious to see exactly how they come together, who maybe wins a war for getting a Spore off. Gary's team, though, has got to be talked about a little bit more. The Pelipper being paired up with a Poliwrath is so essential. The Poliwrath is known to deal some good damage if it can get in a position to do that. And boosted by the rain, that's even more damage. So I want to see if he can get it going, get the ball rolling on it. It has been talked about that sometimes bringing a Pokemon in Team Preview is just there to force your opponent's hand a little bit more. And that's something I want to see if he can get it going. If he can pick what Leonardo is going to bring to try and shut down this Poliwrath potential, then he's able to answer that immediately in the lead and not get caught short by it.
Well, here we go. Game 1 of round 3 of Swiss here at the Pokemon World Championships. Tapu Lele and Smeargle out on the field for Leonardo, and Smeargle and Poliwrath out on Gary's side of the field. Talk about a very interesting lead. No weather up on the field, just that psychic terrain to boost Tapu Lele's psychic attacks, which that Poliwrath is weak to.
Yeah, well, Poliwrath it has access to Swift Swim, but it won't be active already without the Pelipper in play, so it's common to see them maybe brought together a little bit more. I say common with a rogue Pokemon like Poliwrath in play. We do have that Smeargle matchup though, and that's where things certainly get interesting. The targeting on what they're going for, the potential spores on each other, the potential taunts, potential fake outs can get really nasty as Leonardo's Smeargle puts itself in a great position.
Yeah, Gary's Smeargle goes right to sleep from the Spore from Leonardo's Smeargle and is unable to move this turn. Tapu Lele going for a Moonblast, not a psychic type attack against that Poliwrath. You know, still an attack that Poliwrath is weak to. But let's talk about the Moody boosts.
Yeah, well, we do get the accuracy drop there on Leonardo's Smeargle. That could be annoying for a Spore potentially missing. And then we get the evasion boost over on Gary's side of the field. And the evasion boost is actually really helpful in that it may not get hit by other things. So I'm interested to see if that will actually pay off. It's only a little bit right now, but as they start adding up, that's where things can get really, really interesting. You have to play to your outs when that's a big thing.
Speaking of outs, that Poliwrath is getting out of the field, and Pelipper is going to take its place, bringing with it that Drizzle ability and bringing the rain onto the field. So when Poliwrath comes back, Swift Swim will kick in, and it'll be a tad bit faster if it wasn't for that Tailwind coming out on Leonardo's side of the field. Smeargle wakes up and goes for a Spore, and it connects with that Tapu Lele, so it will be unable to move this turn as it takes a little nap.
Yeah, well, Smeargle immediately waking up is so big for Gary. Means that Tapu Lele is going to be a little bit under pressure. A special attack boost not so helpful. And evasiveness falling for Leonardo's Smeargle means it's probably going to get hit as Gary's getting an essential boost in the speed going up. With the sharp rise, it actually means in the Tailwind, it may be able, if it's matching, to actually outspeed or go before Leonardo's. Now, if he can get a Tailwind up with his Pelipper, he's guaranteed to be going first. And with Tapu Lele asleep, what Gary really needs to do is capitalize on this turn. Throw out both a Spore and a Tailwind, you're guaranteed one.
Unfortunately, though, that speed boost did come at the cost of losing one of its evasiveness boosts. So still, a decently agile Smeargle, let's say, able to jump around on the field, maybe dodge some of those attacks. But in this situation, I don't think you're worried as much about evasiveness. You want that speed. You want to be able to counteract the Tailwind on the opposing side of the field. But Smeargle on Leonardo's side still able to move first thanks to the Tailwind. Spore connects with Smeargle on Gary's side of the field, and Smeargle is asleep for the turn. Pelipper free to do whatever it wants this turn as Tapu Lele is still fast asleep, and Pelipper does not go for a Tailwind, instead uses Hurricane to target down that Smeargle and knock it out almost, but more importantly gets that confusion. So it may not even be able to attack the next turn at all, which could be huge given the evasiveness boost that it just picked up.
Yeah, and the big thing about Smeargle here is that it doesn't get knocked out. It's most likely going to be carrying a Focus Sash. That's a staple item on the Smeargle. But if it goes to do anything and actually ends up hitting itself in Confusion, it could knock itself out. Pelipper not going for the Tailwind there, knowing that it needs to get rid of the Smeargle is so important. And try and get rid of that Smeargle while Tapu Lele remains asleep, which means when we do get to the end of Tailwind, Gary's Smeargle could potentially take over the game. That's something that he really needs to capitalize on, and he's looking for that Hurricane to pay off for him.
Pelipper leaving the field, no Hurricane this turn. Instead, Tapu Koko taking its place. Tapu Koko making it so any Pokemon that touches the ground cannot be put to sleep by Spore moving forwards in this game, provided the terrain does not change. Smeargle on Leonardo's side is confused, and it hits itself in Confusion, but does not knock itself out. Smeargle on Gary's side of the field is still asleep, and that Tapu Lele is asleep as well.
Well, this is really interesting, that he had the Tapu Koko in the back and didn't switch it in earlier. We do see the accuracy falling on Leonardo's side, and of course the speed boost again from Gary's Smeargle. If that can wake up and start using things, it won't be able to put things to sleep because all the Pokemon we have on the field right now are connected to the ground. They are benefiting from that terrain. But that speed boost means that it doesn't really mind about the Tailwind at all. So any other useful move it has will be able to do a lot of help to his team. It's going to be in a great position, but Tapu Koko needs to capitalize on this.
Smeargle is confused once again on Leonardo's side of the field, but it is able to use Spiky Shield to protect itself from any damage this turn. Smeargle on Gary's side of the field finally waking up and using Follow Me to ensure that it will be the target of any single target attack, such as the Moonblast, which Smeargle aptly dodges. Tapu Koko finishes up this turn with a Dazzling Gleam to connect with that Tapu Lele.
Well, Gary making use of his Moody boosts here. We do see the evasiveness boost that he picked up earlier coming through and avoiding the Moonblast, which it redirected to itself. Its speed now going back down a single stage, and the speed from Leonardo's going up. So there is just one stage in it between Gary and Leonardo's, but Tailwind is over. That means this Smeargle's liable to get knocked out by this Tapu Koko, but this Tapu Lele is still under threat of being, I mean, Follow Me would be going before because it's a priority move anyway, but if the terrain was changed for any reason, then it may be able to, put it back to sleep.
Smeargle on Leonardo's side of the field will leave the field, and Celesteela will take its place. Celesteela, though, does not make any connection with the ground, so Smeargle on Gary's side of the field could decide to put it to sleep the next turn, provided it's able to stick around. Tapu Koko with the Thunder going to deal a ton of damage to that Tapu Lele, and it is enough for the knockout.
Well, this is one of those Tapu Koko that capitalize on the weather in play. The last turn of rain was so important, I think, for Gary to be in a good position there. And Gary, his Smeargle's been sticking around. It hasn't taken any damage yet, and it's got another evasiveness boost. It's going to be so hard to hit this Smeargle and actually able to knock it out. You know what's really going to struggle to deal with it is the opposing Smeargle from Leonardo's side. The interesting thing is it can't really Spore. Tapu Koko's going to be going before it, but Tapu Koko also wants to deal with Celesteela.
Yeah, Follow Me, I think, is going to be Leonardo's best pick to have that Smeargle do something at least for the turn. And that is what the Smeargle does, wagging its tail around, telling Gary's Pokemon, hey, if you're going to target something, why don't you target me? Gary's Smeargle uses Spore. It will not affect that Smeargle at all, thanks to the electric terrain, and Tapu Koko with the Volt Switch for the knockout, giving Gary the opportunity to send his Tapu Koko back into his party, preserve it for later, and maybe send out that Poliwrath or some other Pokemon on his team to help deal with the Celesteela. Again, it's going to be the Pelipper because, you know, that rain, it did disappear, but now it's right back.
Yeah, he really needs the rain to set up for Poliwrath, and I think showing the Poliwrath early is certainly curious. Celesteela actually able to attack this turn with a heavy slam. It's going to be going towards the Pelipper. Not very effective, but enough damage to break the Focus Sash. Doesn't want to try and hit things such as the Smeargle, who's getting an accuracy boost, as if Spore wasn't already 100% accurate.
Sometimes it's the thought that counts.
Yeah, it really means that it's going to be a big deal. I think this is a little bit different to previous formats where Dark Void's accuracy was important. But now, of course, it changes a little bit. If this Smeargle can stick around till Electric Terrain runs out, might have to find an opening to Spore before he brings the Tapu Koko back in. In the same vein, Gary may want to try and up the pace a little bit, just get all of his damaging Pokemon in while they're both have preferred terrain, and of course the rain is up for the Poliwrath. I think that's the big thing here. But he may not want to give away too much information on the Poliwrath, and I think that's why he showed it, but then switched it out.
It's certainly something that Leonardo has to make sure he plays around, and something for Gary to sort of use to limit what he thinks Leonardo is going to do, because whatever Leonardo thinks can help deal with that Poliwrath at this point should probably be kept safe until that Poliwrath makes a second appearance. Spore into the protecting Celesteela from that Smeargle on Gary's side of the field. Pelipper with the Scald going to attack that Garchomp for about 50% of its health, and Garchomp Rock Slide will connect with the Smeargle. It does connect with the Pelipper, but it fails to knock either of them out.
Well, the one thing I'm really interested in here is that we haven't seen a Tailwind coming out of Gary's Pelipper, and that would have been a really, really great time to use it. Now, of course, with the speed boost that we did see on Gary's Smeargle that are still in play, because it's not been taken off the field yet, without the Electric Terrain, he could start putting some things to sleep. That's really, really important for him to be able to do that, and I just want to see if he's going to capitalize on that turn. Of course, Celesteela was liable to be put to sleep before, but you do have to wonder what this Pelipper is going for if not Tailwind. Putting out damage every single turn with Pelipper certainly seems like an interesting option.
Spore finally going to put that Celesteela fast to sleep, and Pelipper outspeeding that Garchomp again with the Scald for the knockout.
Yes, that's given up the Ghost there entirely. Pelipper moving before Garchomp, not going to be setting up a Tailwind because it's got a Choice Scarf on it. It's locked itself into Scald there and has been able to capitalize off it. So maybe doing a little more damage than usual, but really, really big knowledge to be giving away there that that's a Choice Scarf Pelipper, and it's literally there to help out its friend, the Poliwrath. But it's doing a little bit differently to some of the other rain combinations we've seen. Of course, the Celesteela is asleep. Last Pokemon remaining for Leonardo, and it looks like this one's going to be wrapped up.
You know, it's interesting. Before this match, we were talking about how speed control works. You know, how some trainers, instead of going for a Tailwind, will use Choice Scarf. Here we have the Tailwind user deciding, I don't need Tailwind. My team is fast enough with Swift Swim. You know, maybe Smeargle will get some of those speed boosts. I'll just give my Pelipper a Choice Scarf. Why not?
Yeah, that's so important to see that all come together. And now Gary's given up that information. Against the Tapu Koko, it was very, very obvious that, against the Garchomp rather, that it was very obvious that that's the Choice Scarf holder. And that information's so important. But both these players kind of gambling a little bit with their Smeargles, I think. And the interesting part for me is how exactly are these Smeargles trained, and how did they come together? Because both of these Smeargles, we saw them on the field together a lot, and in every instance, the Moody boost came through for Leonardo beforehand. And I think that's certainly an indication that what we actually have there is the Pokemon a little bit differently trained. Maybe a full investment in speed training from Leonardo, with a little bit less from Gary, where he's invested it somewhere else. He's outsped most of the things he considers threats, but he's left the matchup against Smeargle and accepted that he'll be moving second every time. So with that knowledge, when you come into a turn one like we had in the last game, as both players lock in their teams so quickly,
that was incredibly fast.
If you know you're going to lose that kind of Spore war as such, then you're able to bring in Tapu Koko immediately and not even play that game. Just admit you don't want to play it, bring in Tapu Koko, and not have to worry about losing out on that every single time.
You know, given how quickly these trainers, you know, locked in their teams, makes me wonder, maybe that's a strategy Gary's planning on using moving forward, leading with the Smeargle and the Snorlax on his side of the field. No sign of that Tapu Koko. Against Leonardo's lead, again, the Tapu Lele and that Smeargle.
Very interesting to see how it's been changed up by Gary. Bringing that Snorlax, something he didn't bring at all last game, but maybe he feels he's in a great position to set that up. You know, you can spend some time putting Snorlax to sleep, but at the same time, it's a naturally resting Pokemon. You've got to actually knock it out while it's asleep. that's something that I'll be curious to see if it does come together for him. At the same time, you know, once it's set up, you do want to deal with it, and the switch could be huge here for Gary.
Tapu Koko bringing the electric terrain with it, not playing the Who Spore Will Spore first game. Gary instead going to say, you know what, maybe I'll just use Fake Out to stop the Tapu Lele from
Well, he can now
a
because there's no psychic terrain.
You're right. Another benefit to switching that terrain. Smeargle unable to put the opposing Smeargle to sleep, and Moody Boost time. It looks like nothing too important on Leonardo's side of the field. Gary's Smeargle, again, getting that defensive boost, losing its speed, which could come into play moving forwards if Gary didn't already know if his Smeargle was slower.
Yes, and I think that's very, very important. To see that one come out, knowing what Gary did in that turn, losing the speed wall isn't a big deal here. He'd already known he'd lost it to the opposing Smeargle, so he very, very wisely brought in that Tapu Koko. Getting the Fake Out off, giving up the information, being able to actually successfully use Fake Out because of the loss of Psychic Terrain, which blocks his priority moves, was so, so good there for Gary in this game. Bringing in Mimikyu, showing off all 4 of his Pokemon right off the bat.
All right, so Mimikyu Snorlax, a strategy that Gary has built into this team. Tapu Koko with the Volt Switch. This could be the return of that Snorlax to the field. You know, Mimikyu, Snorlax, great friends, love to work together. Trick Room, maybe a Psych Up on that Mimikyu. Sometimes you'll see paired with Snorlax's Belly Drum or Curse or other stat boosting moves. Smeargle revealing that it has Tailwind on Leonardo's side of the field, going to boost the speed of his Pokemon, and Tapu Lele with that Moonblast going to target down the Snorlax and leave it at approximately 60% of its health. Moody time yet again. Special defense boost and drop on Leonardo's side of the field.
Yeah, the defense is just being changed there. Usually a Pokemon that's not too worried about them. It's the speed and the evasiveness that are the big ones here. Snorlax coming in is big, shows that I think he's going to turn to the Trick Room mode, and that makes that introduction of Tailwind a lot more interesting, especially for Gary, who's probably going to be enjoying seeing that come to play. Mimikyu's Disguise hasn't been busted, and it's very difficult with a Smeargle and Tapu Lele together to really shut it down. Follow Me's not going to help, you can't Spore it while we have Electric Terrain in play. So he should be in a pretty solid position to try and basically set up Trick Room to deal with this. Now, he has to safely as well get some assistance on Snorlax, but if Trick Room's what he wants, it's Trick Room he's going to get.
Celesteela taking the field on Leonardo's side of the field. Probably a better Pokemon to handle the impending Trick Room. Tapu Lele with the Moonblast into the Mimikyu to break its disguise. But Mimikyu more than happy to go for a Trick Room here. But first, its buddy Snorlax going to pound on its stomach a few times, boost its attack all the way to the top at the cost of its own health, and immediately consume that berry in a pinch to get half of its health back. Finally, Mimikyu, there is that Trick Room.
Yeah, but this Snorlax is in a good position to deal with Tapu Lele. Snorlax has always struggled against Celesteela unless left in a one-on-one situation, so that's a very smart switch from Leonardo. This is actually the first Trick Room we've seen this weekend so far, and Trick Room is one of those interesting speed control moves we touched on a little bit before, but it completely reverses the turn order, so the slower Pokemon move before, and the faster Pokemon move later in the turn. So that's something that with Snorlax, a naturally very slow Pokemon, you're going to be able to capitalize on. It may have to spend a couple of turns kind of building up itself again with a potential recycle, but it's not going to be this one.
Not going to be this one, as Return crashes into the Celesteela. It's not very effective, but it still does so much damage. And now we get the first Z move of this game, that Mimikyu, revealing that it's holding the Ghostium Z Crystal. But the big question is, what move is it going to be? It's going to be a never-ending nightmare.
And this is going to double up on the Celesteela, making sure that one of his Pokemon to really answer Trick Room, I think, is taken out of play comfortably, still no longer resisting it. And the combination of Return and Never-Ending Nightmare doing so much damage, while Tapu Lele really left moving last in the turn, getting a Moonblast in, and it's not enough to knock out this Snorlax.
It's not enough to knock it out, and Snorlax is going to move first next turn, barring any priority moves on Leonardo's side of the field, which we haven't seen yet. Maybe that Smeargle has something. But Snorlax able to use Recycle, find that berry, and get its health right back up.
Well, we do know, of course, that Leonardo's Smeargle doesn't have access to Fake Out. That's something we've seen its moves. It revealed Spore and Tailwind, and it's just something you think you'd seen it before if that was going to be the case. And with a Tapu Lele on your team, it's highly unlikely that you'd bring that. So Snorlax is probably in a pretty good position to set up a Recycle, but at the same time, you know, you do have to be worried about this Smeargle. if it can stick around to the point where the electric terrain has ended. Tapu Lele could be under threat from the Mimikyu with something like a Shadow Claw, and even the Mimikyu is just in such a solid position to start trying to deal with things on Leonardo's side. I think the use of the Z move very, very wise. Now, Celesteela's gone one of the biggest threats to Gary's team, probably removed from play quite comfortably.
Smeargle with the spiky shield on Leonardo's side of the field, trying to stall out the Trick Room for as long as possible. Snorlax using that recycle to find its berry, get it back, and munch down on it right away. So Snorlax back up to above half its health, happy to try and take another Moonblast from that Tapu Lele, but play rough from the Mimikyu, trying to knock it out. It misses it. Tapu Lele with the attack drop. Moonblast free to connect with either of the Pokemon on Gary's side of the field. It will connect with that Snorlax, but it does not knock it out.
No, it doesn't actually do quite 50%. And the Tailwind ending is sort of interesting. I think Leonardo was going to be moving last anyway with this setup, particularly the Mimikyu. Smeargle, though, getting an evasiveness boost on Leonardo's side of the field is very big. Now it means you're going to have to hit it twice through boosted evasiveness. That's something that's really difficult to do at times. And while you're doing that, the electric terrain has actually run out from Gary's Tapu Koko, so I think he may be forced to at least try and get some damage down, maybe sacrifice something here.
Follow Me from that Smeargle will ensure that Tapu Lele is able to attack, provided that Smeargle is out on the field. Snorlax taking it safe this turn, going for a recycle to find that Agua Berry and to consume it once again, slowly bringing itself back up to full health. Mimikyu with the play rough. Smeargle dodges it, and Tapu Lele happy to go for that Moonblast again, targeting down that Snorlax.
Well, Play Rough's an interesting choice here. He's forced to use Play Rough over a Ghost-type attack such as Shadow Claw, which we saw through the Never-Ending Nightmare, because it's not going to affect Smeargle. So every single turn, he has to respect that Follow Me coming out. He's forced to use Play Rough, which isn't a 100% accurate move. And with the evasiveness boosts from Leonardo's Smeargle, then it's pretty hard for him to hit it. To hit it twice is going to be a big deal. While this is all going on, Snorlax is slowly recovering amounts of health, a little bit more because Moonblast isn't doing 50%. But that's really not the damage he needs. He needs to find some time to weave in some damage before he gets dragged into a 3 versus 3. I think that's really important for Gary at this point in this game.
Definitely, and Trick Room, I would imagine, will be running out soon as well. So Smeargle, if it's able to stick around for a couple more turns, might be able to just spore the Snorlax, spore the Mimikyu, and just hope for the best. For now, Smeargle is going to use that Follow Me to protect its new partner, Garchomp, who just switched out onto the field. Snorlax, again, using that recycle, again, getting its health back. That really is the best option for it right now. Even though it's attempting to start attacking and start whittling away at your opponent's health, you really have to focus on keeping Snorlax around so it can keep using that boost. Play Rough misses the knockout on that Smeargle, but it will connect this turn. So as Trick Room ends, Smeargle is one hit away from being knocked out, but Gary not in the best spot.
Well, the evasiveness drop makes it a little more manageable, I think, for Gary there. Helps out Leonardo's now only at one stage of boosted evasiveness, so it's a little bit harder to hit. The one thing I'm curious about, though, is how he safely sets up Trick Room. So to do that, he needs Mimikyu to stay around. That's the important thing. But then he has to sacrifice Snorlax and its Belly Drum boost to basically avoid the potential Spore coming out from the Smeargle. That's the only way, and it's such a hard decision to make as a player, what you prioritize more. And I think after all this setup, keeping Snorlax around, it didn't get out much damage with its Belly Drum in play. But Smeargle's already low, we do know that Tapu Lele's already low as well, and Garchomp's the only one that's a little bit difficult to deal with. So I'd rather try and get that out, but Smeargle not even going for the Spore.
Follow Me from that Smeargle, again becoming the center of attention, and Leonardo going straight for the Z move, that Tectonic Rage, going to try and knock out one of these Pokemon, maybe trying to use this to stop the Trick Room.
Yes, that's something that is going to be important. If that's one of your few ways out that you see and you want to keep yourself safe, I think that's one of the better plays. It is going to be connecting with the Mimikyu. So that looks like it's going to be the answer to Trick Room. Not sporing it, but just going for the Tectonic Rage. Of course, the Disguise is already busted, and an easy knockout for this Garchomp. But whatever Snorlax does now is going to be so important.
Snorlax misses the return on that Smeargle. Moody Boost getting an accuracy boost and a special defense drop.
Yeah, that's a big play that didn't connect there. And getting rid of the Trick Room one way or another is probably very, very smart. But Without the Trick Room setup, it does mean this incoming Tapu Koko from Gary is probably in a better position. You kind of give yourself a couple of chances to do well here. If it's one of these Tapu Koko carrying Dazzling Gleam, you get one chance to hit the Smeargle there. You do, of course, have control of the terrain for now. We know Tapu Lele is in the back to potentially switch it up, so Garchomp could swap out for Tapu Lele to avoid the Dazzling Gleam, to allow the Spore to come through from Smeargle. But if Smeargle can do that and avoid, of course, the potential Dazzling Gleam from Gary's Tapu Koko because of its one stage of boosted evasiveness, it's going to be in a fantastic position. Now, that really looks like one of the best outs for Leonardo, getting his terrain in play and capitalizing off that as quickly as possible. Not just with Follow Me, but going after something with this Spore and basically opening up more turns where he can attack for free.
Yeah, while Follow Me is great, its effects only really last for 1 turn. Spore gives you the option of having that Pokemon asleep for up to 4 turns. So using it in a situation like this could be beneficial. Instead, that Garchomp and that Tapu Koko protect, and Smeargle goes for the Tailwind, so it will have at least one more shot of putting something on the field to sleep, provided that Leonardo is able to switch the terrain around appropriately.
Well, that Smeargle setting up Tailwind is in a beautiful position to basically help Leonardo get into a good position. This Garchomp, if it's not a Choice Scarf variety, which it's not, we saw, of course, the Tectonic Rage earlier, will now be able to outspeed Tapu Koko, and I'll be curious to see if he knocks out his own Smeargle maybe this turn to try and get that damage down with Earthquake. That's something that's so important. If you can keep Smeargle safe with a spiky shield, then it'll be sticking around for another turn of potential spores when he gets the Psychic Terrain back into play. But that now means that Garchomp becomes such a big threat, and Leonardo needs to capitalize on these 3 turns that he has to deal the damage under the Tailwind.
3 turns could decide if we're moving on to Game 3 here in Swiss Round 3 at the Pokemon World Championships. Smeargle defying all odds, sticking around on the field for a lot longer, I think, than anybody really expected in this matchup. Tapu Koko, though, not wanting to stare it down any longer. Gary switching it out and sending in his own Smeargle as Leonardo's Smeargle goes for a spiky shield. So Leonardo really playing that Smeargle defensively, allowing the Garchomp to use Earthquake to deal a little bit of damage to the Snorlax, a lot of damage to the opposing Smeargle on Gary's side of the field. But return from that Snorlax will knock out the Garchomp.
Yes, that's the big thing here, is he knows that's kind of the way to go about it. And it looks like, the player's feeling pretty confident in this here. There is going to be the return of the Psychic Terrain when Tapu Lele comes back into play. But that only means that we do know that Gary's Smeargle is going to be able to potentially Spore a little bit here. And it looks like both the players, know their endgame pattern here. Know exactly what's going to happen. Tapu Lele is going to come back in, change the terrain, and Leonardo's basically going to be able to start sporing things. It's the quickest thing on the field. It's got not only a speed boost, but it's also had access to that Spore. So in this turn, he can basically Spore the Snorlax and knock out the Smeargle with Tapu Lele. And then the following turn, he can start knocking out Snorlax. It's really a closed game for Leonardo in this one. The control of the terrain, so important as we approach the end game scenario in this one.
Terrain is really one of the keys to the game. We
It
keep
is.
talking about it, but
It's one of those things that's been so important, though, as people discuss what's the best Tapu Pokemon. Tapu Koko coming back in to keep it safe from the Spore, though. And while it looks like that might have been Leonardo's only out, Tapu Koko is going to put an end to that one.
Smeargle with the fake out on Gary's side of the field for the not knockout on that Tapu Lele. It will flinch this turn and be unable to attack. Smeargle on Leonardo's side of the field using that Follow Me, but because the fake out has a higher priority than Follow Me, it is not able to protect its partner.
Yeah, that's so important to see how that comes together. Smeargle, now it's in a great position, gets the evasiveness boost that it needs. But Gary just needs to stall out the Tailwind in this instance. There's not enough. Now there's no way for Leonardo to change the terrain. He had that one turn where if Gary hadn't switched in Tapu Koko, that was his only out. But in the same vein, it's pretty much a cut and dry deal here in that he doesn't have to worry about that. So overall, looks like Gary's going to wrap this one up very, very tidily. He can Follow Me with his Smeargle in case something goes for damage. He could just protect a couple turns to try and get to that point where Tailwind's ending this end of this turn, and Tapu Koko would just be able to round it out.
Smeargle leaving the field on Gary's side and Snorlax taking its place. So Gary very smartly conserving the fake out for a later turn if he needs it. Tapu Koko protecting itself this turn. Again, Gary not trying to jump the gun, trying to just, keep his options open, ensuring that no matter what, he has his win condition on lockdown. Just a sign of a really experienced player. A lot of people might be antsy, might want to just go for the attacks in this situation, but sometimes that you can't do that.
Yeah, well, the other thing that's good about Tapu Koko in this instance is it brings a spread move in Dazzling Gleam, which means you can't just be completely stopped by the Follow Me. He's going to be able to get some damage down on Tapu Lele, now the Tailwind's ending. And of course, the Smeargle just can't do enough damage. The Follow Me gonna at least try, but I just can't see it being enough, if I'm honest with you.
Well, Smeargle will try to do its best, but Dazzling Gleam is a double target move, and it will get the knockout on both that Tapu Lele and the Smeargle at the same time. So Gary winning 2 games in this round 3 with 2 completely different modes of his team. That's something we haven't really seen yet today.
Yes, a player mixing it up throughout I thought was very, very wise indeed. I love how his team came together. I think Leonardo's team was very good as well. The Smeargle, maybe not the perfect use for it though. Yes, he got the Tailwind up, but I think there's maybe more premium Tailwind setters. And with the Tapu Lele on his side, you do have to wonder if he could have looked to maybe Drifblim to set up Tailwind. That would have been an interesting option.
I don't know. I mean, on the one hand, game 1, we did see Smeargle do what it does best on Gary's side of the field, get those evasiveness boosts, and use Follow Me to just allow his Pokemon to stay around on the field as long as possible. And sometimes when you're at the World Championships, I know that trainers will decide to play a little bit more riskier in hopes that you do get lucky in those situations. So that could just be an indication that Leonardo, rather than going for a safe, consistent option like the Drifblim Lele combination, decided, you know what? I'm at the World Championships, I'm going to risk it all and go for that Smeargle and that Moody ability.
But Smeargle's really not been a popular Pokemon this year. It's been picked up a little bit. The loss of Dark Void really hurt it, but Spore seems to be very, very good. With the prevalence of Tapu Koko, particularly towards the end of the season when I believe there's like 60% of teams had it, Spore just wasn't a valuable choice. Of course, you also got the people who use Tapu Fini. Misty Terrain does exactly the same thing in preventing the Spore. So it just didn't seem like a premium pick, in my opinion, to try and rely on Spore. Now with people moving away from that and bringing their own terrain control, I think with this newer mechanic, people understanding a little bit better how to control the terrain with their switching, with the way they lead the play and stuff, and how they can read into their opponent, they feel there's a little more breathing room to maybe Spore, and we saw both players there. Very smart matchups in the Tapu Lele and Tapu Koko.
It's really interesting that you bring that up. I mean, Gary was the trainer who decided to bring Tapu Koko on his team, and Gary also had Spore, so it's weird because it's just one more thing he has to think about on his own team and how he manages the field. Which normally, I mean, I know a lot of trainers, if they're bringing a Pokemon like Tapu Fini, they won't bring moves like Toxic on their team because they know if I make that mistake and I use Toxic while my own terrain's up, that's just a turn lost on my
you're going to
side.
look very foolish as well.
Yeah.
On top of that. But overall,
not speaking from experience on that one.
Yeah, it's never happened to me either. But on that vein, I think it's better to have that terrain in your control. It means you have the power. So Gary knew when he could and couldn't Spore because he knew when the Tapu Koko was coming in. He doesn't have to make the decision like Leonardo does to guess, is the Tapu Koko coming in? Will I be able to Spore this turn? He just knew right off the bat. And it's the same kind of thing, and Leonardo played it a bit differently in that he knew he couldn't fake out because he likes to lead with Tapu Lele, but he doesn't keep it as an option in case he doesn't get control of the terrain.
Yeah, and that just goes to show you it's all about team building. It is about the matchup as well and how you play the matches, but I think team building, like we keep saying, is probably one of the most important things going into the World Championships. So
well, we didn't see anything from that Poliwrath. We actually saw it
I was just about to bring that up.
Yeah,
I wanted to see something from it.
We saw it appear, and then we didn't see any value out of it. It does have access to Swift Swim, so next to the Pelipper would have been great. The very fast Pelipper, obviously, with the Choice Scarf. But I didn't think it was necessary at all. It just didn't feel to me like it was needed in that matchup. Of course, it has the fighting type, so would answer something like a Snorlax very well, but Leonardo didn't bring his Snorlax, and not seeing it in Game 1, maybe that's why Gary left it at home for Game 2.
Well, we'll just have to ask him ourselves. So I believe Anna is standing